had the folder in my lap when my son's wife walked into the kitchen and told me to get out of her house. Not asked, told. The folder was manila, the kind you get in a 3-pack at the dollar store. Nothing impressive about it. My name was written on the tab in my own handwriting, the same handwriting I'd used for 31 years filling out police reports, witness statements, court filings. I'd been a paralegal for the county prosecutor's office from 1989 until I retired. I knew how to document things. My son's wife did not know that about me. She never asked. That was her first mistake. It was the Sunday before Christmas. My son and his wife had moved into my house 14 months earlier, in October of the year before. The arrangement had been their idea, framed as concern. My wife had passed 18 months prior, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. And my son said he didn't feel right about me being alone in a 4-bedroom house in winter. He was my only child, his wife Renata. I'd always tried to like her. I want to be clear about that. She smiled and nodded while he talked and said, of course, Dad shouldn't be alone. What they did not say, what I only understood later, was that the house was appraised at $380,000 the spring before my wife died. And my son had $61,000 in combined debt between 2 credit cards and a personal loan he'd never mentioned to me. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. My wife and I bought the house in 1994. We were 34 years old. We paid $112,000 for it, which felt like an impossible sum at the time, and we spent the next 29 years paying it off, fixing it up, making it ours. The garden was hers. The workshop in the garage was mine. We raised our son there. We buried both our dogs there, under the oak in the back corner of the yard. When she got sick, we didn't talk about the house much. We talked about other things. Her mother's china. Which of her sisters should get the jewelry box? Whether I would be okay. I told her I would be okay. I believed it when I said it. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. After she died, the house was very quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. The kind where you walk into the kitchen at 6 in the morning and the absence of another person is so loud it fills the room. I took up crossword puzzles. I started walking 3 miles every morning just to have somewhere to go. I called my wife's sister on Tuesdays because she missed her too, and we could talk about her without it feeling like a wound. I was managing, not thriving, but managing. My son called in August, about 8 months after the funeral. He and his wife were living 40 minutes away in an apartment they'd rented for 6 years. The lease was up in October. He said they'd been talking, he and Renata, and they thought it made more sense for them to move in with me than to renew. They'd help with the bills, help around the house, keep me company. I said, let me think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I called my wife's sister. She said it sounded nice having family close. I called my friend Darnell, who I'd known since we were both 22 years old. And Darnell said, "You sure about that, brother?" Which was not a yes, but I talked myself past it. I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in October. My son brought his tools and his television and 4 truckloads of furniture, most of which ended up displacing mine. By November, the living room looked like their apartment had been picked up and set down inside my house. My wife's reading chair, the green one with the rolled arms that she'd had since before we met, ended up in the garage. I moved it back inside. 2 weeks later, it was in the garage again. I told myself these were small things. The first time money came up directly was Thanksgiving, about 6 weeks after they moved in. My son sat down at the kitchen table after dinner and said he wanted to talk about the household budget. He said the utilities were high. He said they were contributing to groceries, but it didn't feel equitable. He wanted to set up a shared account. I said I'd been paying these bills for 29 years and I didn't need a shared account. He said he wasn't trying to start anything. He just thought it would be cleaner. His wife sat in the doorway of the kitchen and said nothing. I agreed to have them contribute $600 a month toward utilities and groceries. It felt reasonable. I wrote it down. The date, the amount, the agreement. Old habits from 30 years of document work. I didn't tell them I'd written it down. I just did it. By February, they had paid $600 exactly once. When I brought it up, my son said things were tight. Renata's car needed work. The credit card payment. He'd make it up. I nodded. I wrote that down too. The excuse, the date, the amount still owed. By April, I'd loaned them $8,000. Not all at once. 1,000 here, 1,500 there. Always with a reason. Always with a promise. I wrote every transaction in a ledger I kept in the drawer of my nightstand. Date, amount, stated purpose, verbal agreement to repay. I'm not a suspicious man by nature, but 30 years of watching people try to reconstruct informal agreements in front of a judge teaches you something. You write things down, even when you love the people involved, especially when you love them. In May, my son asked me to co-sign a loan, $30,000. He said they wanted to pay off the credit cards, get a clean start. I asked to see the statements first. He sent them 2 days later. I noticed he'd waited 2 days, and the balances were higher than I'd expected. Much higher. I said I'd think about it. That was when Renata started being involved in the financial conversations directly. Before that, she'd been in the background. After that, she was in the room. She was not unkind about it. Not at first. She was careful. She'd ask about my health. How are you sleeping, Dad? Are you eating enough? In a way that felt like concern, but landed differently each time. My son started mentioning casually that the house was a lot to manage. The roof would need work eventually. The HVAC was getting old. Wouldn't it make more sense long-term to think about something smaller, something easier? I am 67 years old. I am not infirm. I walk 3 miles every morning. I do the crossword without looking anything up. I have all my own teeth. I did not say any of this out loud. I wrote it down. The loan request was followed, 6 weeks later, by a different kind of conversation. Renata sat down with me while my son was at work, which I noted that she chose a time when he wasn't there, and she talked about estate planning. She said she and my son had been thinking about the future. She said it might give everyone peace of mind if the house were put in a trust. A family trust. She used that phrase several times. Family trust. I asked her what kind of trust she had in mind. She said she had a friend who was a real estate attorney. She'd already spoken to him just informally, and he thought it was a sensible idea given my age and the value of the property. I sat with that for a moment. She had spoken to a real estate attorney about my property. Informally, I said I'd think about it. I did not think about it. I called my own attorney the next morning, a woman I'd worked with for 12 years at the county office, who now had a private practice. I told her everything, starting from October, going month by month. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "You've been keeping records?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Good, keep keeping them." She also said some other things that I want to get to. In July, my son asked me to add him to the deed. We were in the driveway. He'd framed it as practical. If something happened to me, it would make things easier. Avoid probate, just a small thing, easy to do. He said Renata's real estate friend could handle it. No cost to me. I looked at my son and I thought about the man I'd raised. He was a good boy. I believed that. I still believe it. But I also thought about the green chair in the garage. The $8,000 I hadn't been repaid. The attorney who had already been consulted about my house without my knowledge. I said I needed to look into it first. He said, "Dad, you don't need a lawyer for something this simple." I said I like to understand things before I agree to them. He went inside. I stood in the driveway for a while. Then I went to my workshop, got out my notebook, and wrote down the date and the request and the exact words he'd used. No lawyer needed. Simple. Easy. Then I called my attorney. She had already begun moving quietly on my behalf. That's the word I'd use. Quietly. She'd reviewed my records, my ledger, my documentation of the loan requests. She said the cosign request alone, combined with the deed conversation, was worth paying attention to. She recommended a few steps, which I followed exactly. In August, I had my will updated. My attorney was named executor. The house was placed in a revocable living trust with specific language, about what happened if I became incapacitated. Not my son, not Renata, but a successor trustee who was my wife's youngest sister, a retired nurse whom I trusted completely. In September, I established a durable power of attorney for finances and healthcare. Again, not my son. My wife's sister and my attorney, jointly. My son and his wife did not know any of this. In October, I had a formal cognitive assessment done through my doctor. Full battery. I asked for written documentation of the results. The results were excellent. My doctor said I had the cognitive profile of someone 15 years younger, which I found both flattering and useful. The written documentation went into my folder, the manila one, along with everything else. The folder went into a fireproof safe in my workshop, the combination of which only I and my attorney knew. I kept walking my 3 miles every morning. I did the crossword. I called my wife's sister on Tuesdays. November came. The conversation became more direct. Renata started talking about the house as if it were already a shared asset. Phrases like, when we do the kitchen renovation, or our square footage. My son stopped framing things as questions and started framing them as decisions that had already been made. They talked to the real estate attorney again. He'd found a straightforward path to get everything situated. All I needed to do was sign. I said I wanted to review any documents before signing. Renata said the attorney could walk me through it. It would only take an hour. I said I'd like to have my own attorney present. The room went quiet in a particular way. My son said I didn't trust them. I said I trusted them fine, but I'd spent 30 years watching people sign things they didn't fully understand, and I wasn't going to do it myself. That night, I heard them talking in the room that used to be the guest room. I wasn't trying to listen. The house has thin walls. I went to my room and I wrote down the date. December arrived with an ice storm that knocked out power for 2 days. We managed. After the power came back, Renata mentioned offhandedly that she'd been looking at assisted living facilities in the area, just to know it was out there. Just in case. I was 67. I had walked 3 miles that morning in 20-degree weather. I had done the crossword in 18 minutes. I said I didn't think that would be necessary. She smiled and said, of course, she was just thinking ahead. My son said nothing. The Sunday before Christmas, I was in the kitchen making coffee at 7 in the morning. I had my folder with me because I'd been going through it the night before, making sure everything was in order. The house was quiet. The tree in the living room, they'd put it up, which I'd appreciated, had its lights on a timer, and they'd just come on, casting that particular warm glow across the room that my wife had always loved. I was thinking about her. I do that in the mornings. Renata came in at 7:15. She was dressed like she'd been awake for a while. She poured herself coffee without speaking, which was normal. Then she sat down across from me and put both hands flat on the table. She said, "We need to resolve this." I said, "Good morning." She said, "Don't do that. You know what I'm talking about. The house. The trust. We've been waiting for months, and you keep stalling, and we need to move forward." I said, "I haven't agreed to anything." She said, "Your son and I have made decisions based on certain assumptions, and if you're not going to cooperate, then we need to have a different conversation." I looked at her. I had known this woman for 11 years. I danced with her at my son's wedding. I had, at one point, genuinely liked her. I asked what kind of different conversation. She said, "This isn't working. Having you here isn't working. We need the space, we need privacy, and honestly, you'd be more comfortable somewhere designed for people your age." I said, "This is my house." She said, "It doesn't have to be forever. We could work out an arrangement. You'd have your expenses covered. We'd take care of the property." I said, "So you want me to leave my house and sign it over to you?" She said, "We'd make sure you were taken care of." I looked at the folder in my lap. 14 months of records. Every dollar, every date, every conversation I'd thought to write down. The cognitive assessment. The updated will. The trust documents. The power of attorney. My attorney's phone number memorized, not written anywhere they could find. I put the folder on the table. I said, "I want to show you something." I opened the folder and I started from the beginning, calmly, the way I used to walk a new paralegal through a case file. The October move-in date. The verbal agreement for $600 a month, paid once. The loans, I read them line by line, the dates and amounts, $8,000 in total. The cosign request I declined. The deed conversation in the driveway. The estate planning conversation Renata had initiated without my knowledge. The real estate attorney she'd consulted about my property twice before I'd agreed to anything. She tried to interrupt twice. I kept reading. I got to the August section. I read the trust language aloud, the successor trustee, my wife's sister. I read the power of attorney terms. I read the date of the cognitive assessment and the summary finding. Normal range, no impairment, cognitive age equivalent, significantly below chronological age. Renata had gone very still. I said, "My attorney has a complete copy of this file. She's been advised of this conversation. If anything unusual happens with my property, my accounts, or my legal documents, she has instructions to act immediately." My son appeared in the doorway. I don't know when he'd come downstairs. His face was hard to read. I said to him, "I know you're in debt. I know you've been struggling. I should have been easier to talk to about that. That's on me. I meant it. I still mean it. But what's been happening in this house is not a conversation about helping Dad. It's a conversation about Dad's house, and I need you to understand that those are not the same thing." Nobody said anything for a long time. Then my son sat down at the table, not next to his wife, across from her, next to me. He put his face in his hands. There is no clean resolution to this. I want to be honest about that, because the people who tell you these stories often want the ending to feel finished, and mine doesn't feel finished yet. Maybe it never will. My son and his wife moved out in January. It wasn't dramatic, no voices raised. My son came to me privately 2 days after the kitchen conversation, and he cried. He said he'd known things had gone wrong and he hadn't stopped them. He didn't try to excuse it. He just said he was sorry and that he was ashamed. I believed him. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with that belief. Renata left without speaking to me. Regarding the $8,000, my attorney sent a formal demand letter in February. My son responded within a week. He's paying $450 a month. No argument, no negotiation. He set up automatic transfers. The first one came through on the 5th of February, the same day I walked my 3 miles in cold rain and didn't care one bit. The house is quiet again. The other kind of quiet, the absence quiet, but I've gotten better at sitting with it. I moved my wife's screen chair back into the living room. I put it by the window that looks out at her garden. I sit there in the mornings with my coffee when it's too cold to walk. I kept the folder. I added to it the move-out date, the demand letter, the payment records. At some point, I'll stop adding to it. I don't think that point is yet. My wife's sister calls me on Tuesdays now, not just me calling her. We still talk about my wife. We also talk about other things, which I think is healthy. My friend Darnell came over the week after they moved out and we sat in the workshop, and he didn't say, "I told you so," and I didn't say he should have said it louder. We talked about other things instead. He is a good friend. I have been lucky in friends. My son calls on Sundays. The calls are short. They're getting a little longer. I don't know where that goes. I hope somewhere. He's my only child, and I loved raising him, and whatever happened between October and December, he was also the person who sat down next to me at that kitchen table instead of next to his wife. I think about that. I think it matters. I'm 67 years old. I own my house. I have my health and my crossword and 3 miles every morning and the green chair by the window. My wife would have found something useful to say about all of this. She always did. I'm still working out what it is. I've been thinking about the folder sitting on that kitchen table on a Sunday morning in December, my folder and hers, side by side, and what it took to get to that moment. Not the legal steps. Those were just paperwork. I mean what it took inside, the kind of thing you can't fake and can't rush. For a long time, I felt like I had failed somewhere. Not because I lost the house, I didn't, but because I had a son who sat at that table and couldn't look at me. That's not a legal problem. That's something older and harder. I kept turning it over, trying to find where exactly the road bent wrong, and what I came back to every time was this. The choices people make under pressure are not random. They reveal what was already there. Renata made the choices she made because she had decided that what she wanted mattered more than what was right. Not because she was a monster, because she had never learned or had stopped believing that how you get something matters as much as whether you get it, that the manner of a thing is not separate from the thing itself. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it's true, and because understanding it helped me stop asking why. My son made different choices, slower, quieter, and in the end, better ones. When he sat down next to me instead of next to his wife, I don't think he fully understood what he was doing. I think it was a reflex more than a decision. But that reflex came from somewhere, 30 years of how we raised him maybe, or something he found on his own. Either way, it was there when he needed it, and it mattered. In me, I have to be honest about what I did and didn't do. I was not a victim who got lucky. I paid attention for 30 years at work, and I brought those habits home with me. I wrote things down. I asked questions before I signed. I found people I trusted and told them the truth about what was happening. That is not heroism. It's just clarity. Knowing what you're looking at instead of what you wish you were looking at. What I understand now, in a way I couldn't have articulated before all of this, is that those three things, doing right by people, thinking clearly, and holding on when everything in you wants to just give in and sign the paper, they are not separate virtues. They reinforce each other. Renata had none of the three working together. My son had the first and found his way back to the others. I had spent a career building all three without thinking of them as anything except doing my job. The house is still mine. The green chairs by the window. My son calls on Sundays. I am 67 years old, and I have learned that the best protection you have is not a safe or a lawyer, though both help. It's the habit of paying attention to your own life, to the people in it, to what is actually being said under what is being said. That habit will not make your family perfect. It will not spare you grief. But it will mean that when someone sets a folder in front of you and tells you to sign, you already know what's in it. That's not a small thing. I promise you that's not a small thing.